subject I'm supposed to be talking about this afternoon is Chapter 7, The Planes of Nature, as indeed I will, insofar as there's anything left to say, which hasn't already been said. Both Joy and Geoffrey have usurped my material. I feel dispossessed. Naked and alone. Yes, well, quite. How would you feel if you'd prepared a talk and they'd pinched all your material? Before we start on that subject this afternoon, I'd like to add a little footnote to what I was saying yesterday. You remember the diagram we had up on the board yesterday with the point at the center, the diamond shell hands, and then outward from them the elementals, and outward from them the forces and matter of the objective world. Well, that very poor representation of the nature of being and life is, to my mind, absolutely beautifully expressed, and I was reminded of this sometime recently in a passage in Volume 2 of The Secret Doctrine, and I propose to read something of this. Now, if you want to follow it, please do, but otherwise just relax and let the words wash over you. If some of the words are not familiar, then perhaps for this purpose it would not matter too much.
Where in The Secret Doctrine?
It's on page 33 and 34 of Volume 2 in the original edition. I really couldn't tell you where it is in relation to any other edition, because there's no very obvious.
The chapter number.
It's Sloka 2, Commentary B, but Commentary B is a very long commentary. It's a passage from some of these occult commentaries to which she makes reference from time to time. I'm not going to read it all. However, this bit, this much I will read. It's quite a lengthy extract, so be prepared. The spheres of being, or centers of life, which are isolated nuclei, breeding their men and animals, are numberless. Not one has any resemblance to its sister companions, or to any other in its own special progeny. All have a double physical and spiritual nature. The nucleoles, that's the center of the nucleus, the nucleoles are eternal and everlasting, the nuclei periodical and finite. The nucleoles form part of the absolute. They are the embrasures, which is the openings, the embrasures of that black, impenetrable fortress which is forever concealed from human or even Dianic sight. The nuclei are the light of eternity escaping therefrom. It is that light which condenses into the forms of the Lords of Being, the first and the highest of which are collectively Jivatma. From these downward, formed from the ever-consolidating waves of that light, which becomes on the objective plane gross matter, proceed the numberless hierarchies of the creative forces, some formless, others having their own distinctive form, others again, the lowest elementals, having no form of their own, but assuming every form according to the surrounding conditions. Thus there is but one absolute upadi, basis, in the spiritual sense, from, on, and in which are built for manvantaric purposes the countless basic centers on which proceed the universal, cyclic, and individual evolution during the active period. The informing intelligences which animate these various centers of being are referred to indiscriminately by the men beyond the great range as the Manus, the Rishis, the Pitris, the Prajapati, and so on. And as the Dhyani Buddhas, the Chohans, Melhas, Bodhisattvas, and others on this side. That's the picture that it paints.
Page number?
33, 34 in Volume 2.
Wonderful.
What a gorgeous picture that it paints. I love that picture of the dark fortress with these embrasures through which the light streams outward into manifestation. It's a beautiful picture. So, to move on to what I'm supposed properly to be talking about today, planes of nature. Well, we've had a good deal, as I will appreciate already today, on the nature of these planes, so much of what I say will be repetition, but perhaps from a different perspective, from the point of view of a different mind. Maybe this will help you a little. I've started off this particular section, section 7, with a very brief discussion of what is meant by a plane, and in the section in part 3, which is on page 88, paragraph 7.1, I have actually quoted a definition taken from the Theosophical Glossary. I've no idea who wrote this. As Joy pointed out, HBB was not involved in this to any great extent, so for all I know this was written by G.R.S. Mead or whoever else was involved. However, who cares? It's quite a good definition, and doesn't really matter who said it if it strikes home, does it? Just look at that for a moment, if you will. A plane, as used in occultism, the term denotes the range or extent of some state of consciousness, or of the perceptive power of a particular set of senses, or of the action of a particular force, or the state of matter corresponding to any of the above. Well, I think that's a pretty comprehensive definition, and I like it. It'll do as far as I'm concerned, because it's pretty non-specific. It doesn't leave you with any pictures as to planes being places. Well, that's one of the things which is going to be a persistent theme in what I'm going to say this afternoon. Planes are not places. Well, that chimes in well with what I've been saying over the last few days, and indeed what Joy has been saying over the last several days about consciousness being primary. When we talk about planes, I believe that, again, consciousness is the primary factor that we need to take into account. And as we saw from what I was saying yesterday, and quoting from the literature, perceptive faculty relates directly to the evolution of the 7 elements or qualities of nature, Joy so well elaborated today. And again, the forces tie in with all of that. So it's all very much a living process that we're looking at here, rather than something static. Whence originate these planes? One of the themes which emerges from this is that the 7 planes are related directly to the various hierarchies of creative powers. Now, we talked about those in chapter 5, and in the passages that Geoffrey has quoted for you in his diagrams and notes, one of the ones, I think it was diagram 11, which was the one which outlined the hierarchies, though I may have got it wrong. One of those diagrams said that the hierarchies directly were responsible for the planes of nature. Now, this is something that I'd like to explore with you and see if we can take it a little bit further. Paragraph 7.2 in the book is my own way of viewing this, this and indeed the next one. We talked about the primordial 7 when we were talking about hierarchies in section 5, and you perhaps recall that I pictured that as 7 centres emerging from the one centre, representing 7 centres of consciousness, though no consciousness that we can perceive. And I picture this to myself as the first emergence of consciousness. Now we have to be extraordinarily careful not to make of these beings men such as ourselves in any shape or form, but abstractly, philosophically, metaphysically, we can view this as as I've said in the notes, the polarization of spirit and matter, and as the poles separate, so consciousness dawns. Figuratively, it is the dawn, it is the waking up. It is, as we saw so beautifully in stanza 7, in sloka 7 of stanza 3, that dawn which it describes, the lifting of the veil and so forth, the awakening of consciousness. Now, what emerges from this, whether we take that particular picture that I paint there or whether you take some other, we come to what is described in paragraph 7.3 in the notes, and in this instance I would like you to look at the associated paragraph in part 3, which is again on page 88. Just a little bit of background to this before we look at the paragraph itself. In studying this whole question of planes, one associated presentation that we have is that of the so-called lokas and talas. Now, this is an area which is far from easy to sort out in the literature. There's quite a lot said about lokas and talas, firstly in the esoteric instructions, and secondly in HPV's letters to Sinnett, both of which sources I have quoted in these few pages which follow. In one place, she delineates the 7 talas. Now, talas exoterically are referred to as being the hells, the unpleasant places to be. But paradoxically, her description of the talas doesn't make them sound hell-like at all in this particular presentation that I've quoted from here. As in everything else, there are 7 talas in descending order, or perhaps ascending order, should we say, because in the exoteric version, the first is the lowest hell, which is the worst and nastiest place to be, and then ascending through 6 others, they are increasingly less nasty as we work our way up the scale. However, she completely reinterprets this and attaches to these talas completely another interpretation. So this definition that you have here of a tala, the a is the negation here, tala in this sense a place, so it's the negation of a place, it's no place, as she puts in the commentary. Well, there are various other talas which follow from this. I don't carry in my head the list of them, but there are the likes of patala and sutala and rasatala and others, but we need not be concerned with those at the moment. Atala, she says, in this particular definition, the atmic or auric state or locality. It emanates, perhaps we ought to say radiates, Joy. Radiates directly from absoluteness, and is the first something in the universe. Its correspondence is the hierarchy of non-substantial primordial beings, in a place which is no place to us, in a state which is no state. This hierarchy contains the primordial plane. I remember when I first read that, I thought, no, she's got it wrong. It's the wrong way around. You don't mean that, do you? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she did mean exactly that. It's not that the plane contains the hierarchy, it's not that the first plane contains the primordial hierarchy, but quite the other way about. The primordial hierarchy contains the plane. In other words, this is the extent of the consciousness of the primordial hierarchy. It is having woken up what consciousness has evoked. Just as our consciousness evokes an understanding, a perception of the world around us, which if we're not conscious we certainly don't do. So as I picture it to myself with this primordial hierarchy, they have evoked a place which is no place, a state which is no state, so without texture and quality and quantity that we can understand. The only way that she can express it is in paradox. A state which is no state, a place which is no place. But it's a beginning. It's something. What? God knows, but it's something. The first something in the universe. Do you remember that passage that Ianthe directed us to look at in Volume 1, those lengthy extracts from some commentaries? There is a passage there which is perhaps a shadow of, or a reflection of this process. This is on page 289 on Volume 1, in Volume 1 if you wish to follow. The commentary is number 17, XVII. The initial existence in the first twilight of the Mahamanvantara is a conscious spiritual quality, whatever that might mean. In the manifested worlds, it is in its objective subjectivity, whatever that might mean, like the film from a divine breath to the gaze of the entranced seer. It spreads as it issues from Laya throughout infinity as a colourless spiritual fluid. Now, isn't that that's the nearest I can come to a passage which is gives us some sort of feel for what this first state might be like. It's the first something in the universe, a colourless spiritual fluid. Well, a film to the gaze of the entranced seer. These are all just suggestive phrases. Again, we don't want you to mistake the map with the territory and start pouring out liquids out of bottles. But as long as you keep it loose, perhaps it does suggest something to the intuition. It's a nice phrase. We proceed from there, presumably, with the remaining 7 hierarchies, each of whom we've then presumed by correspondence and analogy is responsible for, related to, one of these 7 planes that we have been referring to today. Now, on this question of 7 planes, I have a number of comments that I want to make before we start exploring relationships in more detail. Firstly, are we sure that when we talk about 7 planes, we should be talking about 7 as if we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? I have a strong suspicion that we're not. And these are not like things that can be counted. They are as different as apples and oranges. And if I gave you 7 apples and oranges, you could say, well, I've got 7 fruits, and I can make a collection of them in that way, but I can't say that I've got 7 oranges or I've got 7 apples. And I believe that when we get round to talking about the 7 planes, they are not of a like nature. One of the diagrams that Geoffrey gave you came from SD1, page 200, where she sets out these 7 planes as 7 divisions, vertical divisions, or horizontal divisions, should I say, on the page. But she makes a fascinating distinction. She divides the upper 3 into the divine and formless worlds of spirit, and the lower 4 into the manifested worlds. And I believe that this distinction between the inner 3 and the outer 4 is a distinction that we should dwell on and think about for a little while. It is not, I don't believe, a graduated series of states, one which merges into the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and so forth, in a series of steps. Not, I believe, like the colours of the rainbow, wherein red merges into orange, into yellow, into green, into blue, and so forth. I don't believe that the 7 planes are like that. I believe that there's a fundamental difference in kind between the inner 3 and the outer 4. We can perhaps understand something of this when we remember that classically, traditionally, we think of our principles in this way. We talk of a higher triad and a lower quaternary of principles. Now, at various other times, she presents the principles in other ways, but that is one persistent idea which comes across. And again, why bother making such a distinction? Well, you might say it's concerned with the individuality as opposed to the personality, and we're just drawing a distinction. But perhaps they are fundamentally different in kind. And it's not just a series of graduated states within the sevenfold man, but the 2 aspects of man, the inner and the outer, are radically of a different order. And I suspect the more I study this, that this is the case, and what is true of man is also true of whatever other entity to which these planes might apply. Well, you might say, well, okay, what is the difference then? Something of the difference is, I think, suggested by the use of the terms formless for the inner 3 and with form for the outer 4. To those which are with form, the qualities that we were talking about yesterday with the elements and everything which is to do with form applies. It's interesting, do you remember I talked about the hierarchies of creative powers and enumerated a 12-fold scale, and within the 12-fold scale there were a lower 7 which were directly concerned with our solar universe? Well, even within those 7 there were an inner 3 hierarchies which she said were formless, and as soon as we got to the 4th in the scale of those hierarchies, the 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th, those were to do with form. The highest in the atomic forms, she calls them, whatever atomic forms might be. But again, the distinction is there. The terms which, again, are used in that diagram that Geoffrey referred to, for the 4 lower planes are very interesting. The terms used are borrowed, I think, from the Kabbalistic, the archetypal, the creative or intellectual, the substantial or formative, and the material, objective material. Now, heavens, if we started with the 4th, which is archetypal, what does that leave you for the inner 3? I mean, you've really covered the whole range, haven't you, with archetypal down through creative and substantial and to material. You haven't really left a whole lot else besides to be covered.